Hello, my name is Paul Charlebois, and today I'm going to talk to you about contextual user research for medical device development. So a little background on myself. I've been an industrial designer for about 17 years, of which 11 of those have been working specifically in the medical field. I lead a team of specialized human factors, industrial designers, and user experience people here at StarFish. So what is contextual research? Contextual research can be it's something that can be done in one of numerous different ways. Here at StarFish, we do a bunch of different types of things, such as observing users within their environment, doing their actual jobs. We might do some training sessions or observe training sessions of users to get a little bit more insight into how they do their daily work. For example, we can have an ER doctor that'll do some ultrasound demos for us for a device that we're working on. Or maybe we'll be observing a critical care nurse in an ICU environment with real patients to understand some of their daily challenges as they do their jobs, as well as we may also have been doing some training observation for mass casualty responding for military and first responders. And why do you need to do contextual research? So this really allows the designers to become more knowledgeable in the space, because none of us are doctors or nurses or anything like that. So really it's important that before you start doing any kind of development, you really get a firm understanding of your users and your use environment. It allows you to become more empathetic to the challenges of these users as well as the patients, and it allows designers to advocate for a better experience for users. So you really want to ensure that the status quo, you understand where that is, you understand the challenges, and as well as any potential improvements and insights that can make your product better. So who are your users and stakeholders? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say that you're working on a neuroimaging system, let's say for a new microscope to be used in neurosurgery. So classically you would think, okay, well there's going to be a surgeon, there's going to be some nurses that are maybe going to interact with the device, but you have to think a little bit beyond that. Like for example, you have to think about the servicing technicians in biomed that might have to deal with it after its use. You might have to think about the orderlies that'll do the preparations and cleaning of the device, moving it around, as well as the purchasing managers and other decision makers that will be involved in actually buying the capital equipment. So you really need to understand your users. Quite often, our customers come to us and they're really enthusiastic about their technology and they really understand their technology deeply, but they're more focused on the development of the technology than the actual product itself and how it's going to get used with users. And so that's where we come in trying to really get in there, get into the environment, get in with the users and really kind of understand that a little better. For example, we were working on a device that was for use during labor. And so we had been told by our customer, okay, I've got a nurse, she is in labor right now, and basically what's going on is she's okay with you guys coming in to do an observation, because sometimes observations, we do need to get consent for all of these things, and then I'll be able to show you the procedure of how to do this thing that I'm going to do. So we get in there, and it's a little bit of chaos. The nurse is screaming and there's a lot of excitement, and then it turns out that the behavior of the doctor completely changes and he does something that he totally didn't tell us he was going to do. So, and the neat thing about that is that's a real situation. So you really get to kind of see that happen live instead of somebody sitting across the table and trying to explain that to you. And as a usability group, we're really sort of the bridge between the designers, the manufacturers, and the users. So you need to understand your users beyond their daily work lives. Like for example, cultural implications can have significant impact on your device. Years ago, we worked on a device for platelet apheresis, and so we were working on a consumable on this device, and our customer had to set up a special line for the consumables that were going to go to Japan, because they had extra requirements of cleanliness that went beyond sort of the regulatory needs of their other markets. And so it really kind of gave us some insight on understanding sort of the variability that can happen in various markets that go beyond the technical requirements that you may have for your device. You also have to understand the usage environment. When we're doing research, the user is important, but understanding where the device will be used often has pretty significant impact. For example, years ago we were doing some research in the ICU, and so we were doing a patient transport with a heart monitor system down to CT so that the patient could be scanned. And we had noticed during use that this monitor had the ability to be hung on the side of the bed or something like that. And this was an older hospital, and it had much tighter quarter elevators. And so when we brought the bed into the elevator, as the door was closing, it just kind of kept smashing against the monitor. And we sort of were surprised to see this. And that, when you consider the design of your device, you have to make sure that you understand what are the different sort of scenarios that they'll use. In theory, you would have thought, okay, well, they're just going to put it on top of the bed probably, but that wasn't suitable for them because they had a whole bunch of other things that they had to deal with. So, it goes, and that's something that's not specific just to the bed, but even to the infrastructure things like elevators. We had done some cadaver testing, for example, sometimes on some devices to really kind of get us a real understanding of how the interactions happen from a physiological perspective, as well as understanding what happens when I'm using this in a room. It's cold, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of machinery around, there's people moving around, so it really helps you to kind of simulate that and get a better understanding of what all these different scenarios could bring to you. Another scenario happened during a neurosurgery observation. We were looking at a device that had to be set up sort of partially through the procedure. And so to give you a little bit of an idea, so we got the lights turned off. There are some lights just around the patient themselves. The surgeon is operating on the patient, and the circulating nurse is tasked with trying to get this device set up. And we're noticing that the circulating nurse had a lot of struggles in trying to get the device to do whatever it is that she needed it to do. And so this really kind of brought about a sort of communication breakdown between the surgeon and the nurse, which was really brought on by the fact that the interface wasn't super suitable to be used, or at least to be set up in an environment like this. And so it's really important for the designer to kind of understand that, and that when we're doing our design work, we've actually considered some of these different varying use cases to ensure that they have a successful use and not cause these problems and situations during the procedure. So what are a few different methods of contextual observation? So we use a host of different types of methods, such as fly on the wall, which is basically when we're observing silently without asking any questions. So that's advantageous because you really allow the whole process to happen and to unfold in front of you. It's great if people don't really know that you're there to observe the procedure even to a certain level, because you really want everything to happen naturally so that you can capture cues that you might not get just in a user interview. Sometimes we'll do some partial interactions, so where we get to ask occasional questions. Perhaps it's a real procedure, it's actually happening on a patient, but we're interacting, we're engaged with the whole process. So that's kind of nice because you get to ask a few more pointed questions to give you some clarification on what's happening. But it does disturb the flow a little bit, so you might miss out on some cues that would have otherwise happened if you did the fly on the wall technique. And then other times, it's going to be more on the simulated side. So we might have, for say, a cognitive walkthrough, where our practitioner will go through the process of using a device or doing a procedure. There's probably not a patient involved. It's really kind of just done in a more casual fashion. They're thinking aloud and they're giving us as much information as they think they can. And so that's kind of nice because you get to see the actual procedure as it's sort of intended to be. But again, there you might not get a lot of the cues that they just won't tell you about because they may not know that they do certain things which would be valuable in the development of your device. And of course, the last one is role-playing. So for some types of devices, obviously this isn't always suitable. It's great to actually get to use a device or really kind of get a little bit more involved with some coaching from the practitioners to really kind of get in depth and get into the psyche of how to use the device or do that workflow for the device. So I'm going to go into a case study on a device that we worked on where contextual research was important to the development and success of the device. We developed a next generation STERNALINTRAOSSEOUS infuser for a customer of ours. And so they had come to us with a device that was on the market, was largely used by the military, but had some challenges, and they really wanted to do a couple things. They wanted to expand their market a little bit, better serve the market they were serving, as well as reduce some of the cost to manufacturing the device. And so the device, for example, had it had a lot of parts. It was expensive to manufacture. It had low adoption to the civilian market, and the packaging was not ideal for tactical use. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what intraosseous infusion is. So basically, when it comes down to fluid delivery, either in a hospital setting or EMS or on the battlefield, there are only really a couple of ways that you can successfully deliver fluids when you have a trauma patient. And so one of them, of course, is the classical IV, so intravenous. Everybody knows what that is. So that's basically inserting a needle directly into the vein, and then you can deliver the fluids this way. The challenge is that that's not always it's not always a viable access for every scenario, particularly when we're talking about the battlefield and military medic usage. And so we really wanted to focus on sort of the extreme environment, because we knew that this was going to be one of the biggest challenges to redesigning the device and really kind of getting that second generation device onto the market. So I'm going to explain a little bit about how intraosseous infusion gives vascular access to practitioners. So our bodies are made up of a whole bunch of different types of bones. So flat bones such as the sternum or the hip bone have really good access to red bone marrow. And red bone marrow is key because it gives you just as good vascular access to the heart and beyond as you would get from venous. So the trick is to get it in there. Now, classically, other devices usually go through the epiphyseal and metaphyseal ends of long bones, such as the humerus or the tibia. But there's challenges with getting into those areas because landmarking is more difficult and there's more bone to go through. So the device itself requires a significant amount of training to get successful usage. And so the nice thing about the customer's device is that it already had a really good workflow and had a reliable insertion with different varying situations because it was always into the same place, into the manubrium of the sternum. So the sternum is made up of 3 different bones: the xiphoid process, the body, as well as the manubrium, which is the top one. And it's easy to landmark, which is a key thing when you're doing procedures like this, because you just got to find a sternal notch, which everybody has. It's basically this little spot here between the 2 clavicles, and you can just use that to then find where it is you're going to do the insertion. So it was important for us to really understand both how the device is used right now, as well as how users are actually using this device in practice in the field. So who are the main users of the device? So that is one of the key questions we have to answer. And so we understood that the military was the biggest broad user, but we wanted to understand who are the users within the military that this will have the most impact on. So we had the opportunity to interview special operative medics, as well as understanding what the challenges were to bring it into the civilian market. So we also wanted to interview some civilian paramedics, as well as doctors for hospital use. And one of the challenges that we'd heard from the civilian side and one of the resistance to the market adoption was the fact that the device was kind of scary looking. And because of the nature of how the device works, it has what we call the bone probe. And so that would be the 8 needles that you're seeing in a circle here, as well as a stylet that goes in through the middle. And so that's actually where the fluid's going to come out, and that's what's going to be left behind. But the bone probes around the circumference are actually what's going to find the bone, and so they're actually a critical component. But when you produce something like this to someone who's not used to seeing significant trauma or using something like that on a daily basis, they sort of opt to go for a different device configuration because they're not sure they're going to be successful, or they're going to have issues finding the landmarking or something like that. The other thing we really want to understand is what is the process? So what's their procedure? What are some of the different challenges that they have to overcome on a daily basis when they're dealing with treating patients, on the battlefield? And so we learned a whole bunch of things that probably wouldn't have applied, say, to a hospital setting or the civilian market. Like, for example, for them, the key thing is to stop the bleeding and keep them breathing. So this is something that what they call tactical combat casualty care, or TCCC, really tries to burn into the minds of every single medic that gets trained in the military today. They also have to understand what are the different limitations that we're going to have. So for instance, they have to carry everything on their backs, particularly the special operatives. They do a lot of operations that are far in the field and are not supported by large vehicles or helicopters and things like that. So we really have to understand that there's not a lot of room in their mess bags. And so if we're going to take up that space, what is that optimal configuration to ensure that they can take the device along and they'll be able to use the device successfully if they have to deploy one. Their priorities are a little bit different, right? Like for example, they told us, generally CPR is not an option when you're under fire because it demands an extra man or woman to be able to do this, and that's going to be a serious problem because you're going to have to take people away from the fight, and fire superiority is really the way that you're going to have the best chance of getting a successful mission and bringing everybody home safe. Then understanding the workflow. So when there is an injury, what are the different things that they're going to have to deal with? So we talked about hemorrhage. So there's this thing that they call MARCH. So massive hemorrhage. So obviously everyone understands that. I explained that. The airway. So there's devices such as cricothyrotomy, so there's special devices for dealing with that. So airway obstruction, trying to make sure that they still get good airflow into the lungs. So respiration, so pneumothorax for penetrating trauma. So they have needle decompression kits and things like that. So they were sort of explaining, these are the things we have to deal with, and these are the devices we have to deal with so that we understand what's our device competing with for space in their mess bag. So fluids delivery, circulation, so having to, and this is where the FAST device comes into play, dealing with bags and things like that. They're going to go along with that, saline bags, and hypothermia, which can be a problem even in the hottest environments when you get pretty significant fluid loss. And so then that would be dealing with blankets and special mylar blankets and things like that to cover the patient in to ensure that they don't go into any kind of shock or minimize the opportunity for shock. In doing our research, there's a lot of takeaways that we learned, and some of the things that they told us were things such as they have to ensure that all of the injuries or all the wound locations are plugged before you start bringing fluid in. If you just start giving fluid to someone who's bleeding, it's just going to go back out the same way that it's coming in. So that's a key thing to consider. Blood is like mucus or snot. It's very slippery, and so what does that mean? So that means you need to consider the usage of the grip of the device. Imagine that their hands are going to have blood on them. Imagine that they'll have gloves with blood on, which makes it even more challenging. Adhesives don't like sweat. They don't like blood. These are all situations you're going to have to deal with if you're using an adhesive pad to help localize your landmark. Sterility was not a priority to them. They repackaged the devices into Ziplocs, the same kind of Ziplocs that you would put a sandwich into, because they didn't like how many different components came into the bag that the device came with from the factory. And so that meant that sterility wasn't it was a low priority to them, and really they just wanted an all-in-one device with not a lot of auxiliary pieces and bits and things like that, because when they're out in the field, they're doing a procedure. They don't want to leave anything behind. It gives the enemy an advantage if they see that somebody's injured in their group. And so being able to pick up and move along without leaving anything behind is critically important to them. And we really wanted to understand, like, their mind is very much in a work mode. It's not like you're sitting down and having a conversation. So you really have to kind of keep it simple, not have complicated features or anything like that can make it difficult for them to use this in a high stress situation. So I'm going to do a little demonstration with the existing device as well as the new device that we came up with after we had done the design and development of the Intraosseous Infuser. So the existing device basically comprised of a bag, and so you open up the bag and you have all these components that come out of it. So you're talking about instructions for use. You've got your the sight guard. You have the site locator as well as the base. This is basically going to tell us where to put the actual incision site, the device itself, as well as sharps protection. And so the way you use the device is I'm going to move these over here just for a moment now that we've seen that. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is a primary survey of the patient. I'm not going to do any of that, but you're going to have to find the site itself. So I'm going to use my trusty little patient here. And so finding the sternal notch is the first most important component. And so if you're using this device here, for the sake of demonstration, I'm not actually going to take the tape off, but you have to remove the tape here, remove the tape on this side, and then you want to tape it so that your landmarking, your sternal notch here is going to be across this here like this. So you're going to do that, and that tells you where you need to put your actual incision site. So once you've got that stuck on there, then you take your actual device, pull the cap off, and then you're ready to go. Some of the key things that they told us is perpendicularity with this device is very important. If you don't get perpendicularity, you're going to have trouble with a full deployment. So what I'm going to do, just to prevent my model from sliding, is I'm going to put my hand here, but in actuality you would probably want to do this with two hands. And then you push until you feel that thump. That means that you've now made a full penetration, and you pull it out, and what's left behind is the portal itself. And so you want to take your these are the anti-buckles, just a component of the device. You pull that away. You want to put your sharps protection on here like this. And then because this device has a male coming out, that is not a common connector to connect to a saline line. So you need to do a double female. So you pull this off, connect that to here, pull this off, and then you can do your aspiration, which basically requires you to have a syringe. And so then you connect your syringe to here, and then you can do the aspiration as well as the bolus for getting the fluid started. And so then once that's all set up and you've got good flow, then you take this part and you put that back over top, and then that gives you protection on the site when you put the chest armor back on, because you do want to keep your chest armor for additional patient safety during transport to the hospital. So as you can see, there was a lot of steps, a lot of pieces. It's a little bit complicated. We really wanted to see how we can simplify this whole process. So now I'll show you the solution that we came up with. And so there was two things. In order to cater to both the civilian market as well as the military, we came up with there's two different packages, if you may, two different form factor packages. So one is what we call the hospital tray, which is this one here, as well as what we call the tactical packaging, which is this one here. And so basically the tactical packaging is more compact, it allowed it to put in their mess bags better, and it gives them full protection. It conserves the sterility, which was a key requirement of ours. So you take the cap off, you want to conserve this cap, you're going to need it later for site protection, and then you peel this off basically the same way you peel a lift and peel on a ketchup bottle. In fact, it's the same kind. And then inside there's your device. So you peel that off, pull out your device. This is the device that we came up with. And so the device has a lot of features integrated into it that used to not be. So sharps protection, as well as an integrated foot. And the safety, everything is sort of just integrated into one piece. We made it smaller and lighter and simpler to manufacture. So as well as thinking of the usability, we also had to think about the manufacturing side of things. So then what you do is you want to take this tab off, and what the tab does is it peels the label off the bottom, so it's now sticky, and then you just give it a tug, and then you're left with a device ready for activation. So the device has a sternal notch built into it, so you use that sternal notch to find your location, and then as you push your device down, the foot will adhere to the skin, and then again here, you'd probably do it two hands. I'll just do it with one. You push down until you hear that click, and then you pull up, and what's left behind is the portal. And the nice thing about this portal is it already has the female connector, so that you can put your syringe directly into it, and then you don't need that extra female to female adapter. So you can do your bolus and aspirations this way. And additionally, so there was only one. So we went with one instead of two anti-buckles. That way there's less pieces to lose. And then there's this piece here, which has a little tether on it. So then you can just tether that down here, and the site is basically ready to go. You can take this. There's a tape that comes off of that. and then you bring that and put it over the site like this, and then your site is ready for patient transport. And so, as you can see, the nice thing now too is you're left with a device that's got sharps protection, so you can put the safety back on, and then you don't have to worry about the device pushing down and deploying the needles. So I don't even have to worry about adding any extra pieces or anything like that. So that's all I'm left with, as opposed to all these other components. So, and the nice thing is, we went with a design that had less needles for the bone probes. So there's a lot of engineering that went into that, and then that was much more well received with the civilian market because the device was much more user-friendly looking. And it came in a couple of colors: blue for hospital use, black for tactical use, but they're largely the same device. So in closing, you can really never know too much about your user. You really want to become as much of an expert in their daily lives as much as you can. You want to be curious. You really want to get into character. Don't be afraid to really kind of role play and understand what that means to be that user in order to get a successful device design. Be enthusiastic. It allows you to be empathetic to the users and the patients, and you also have to advocate for the users throughout the design and development of the project with the broader team as well as the customer themselves. So we'd love to talk to you about your project. So please email us at info@starfishmedical.com if you would like to discuss your project with us, or please visit our website at starfishmedical.com if you'd like to learn more about this or other devices that we've worked on. Thank you very much.